started. Welcome everyone. This is Lisa Muchachito and I'm the program manager here at the Columbia Water Center at Columbia University. And on behalf of CWASI and our America's Water Project funded by the National Science Foundation Water Sustainability and Climate Grant, I would like to welcome everyone to today's talk, which is part of an ongoing webinar series. In brief, our America's Water Initiative is a program that aims to build a network of academic institutions, government agencies, and private industry to develop a research agenda that will inform water infrastructure improvements in the United States through innovative management solutions, new technologies, and new policies. The speakers in this webinar series are helping us to understand what can be done and what the possible implications are. So today, it is my pleasure to introduce Michael Campana, who is a professor of hydrogeology and water resources management at Oregon State University and technical director of the American Water Resources Association, and he will be speaking on integrated water resources management, the Emperor's New Clothes, or indispensable process. After Michael finishes his presentation, he will have a few minutes to answer questions. And I just ask that everyone please use the chat box to type in your questions. And then just to let you know, this webinar, as well as all of our past webinars, are posted on the Columbia Water website and the CWASI website. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michael and let him go.
Thank you very much, Lisa. I appreciate it, and I appreciate all you folks taking time out from your busy day to a little bit of time with me. I also want to thank Professor Lal of Columbia and CWASI for inviting me to participate, and this will be a real pleasure. As you can see from the title slide, I had a bet with someone about how much stuff I could jam onto a title slide, so I think I've won it. The Emperor is depicted up in the right-hand corner, and yes, that is me at a conference several years ago where, in order to promote attendance, I dressed up as an emperor. But in keeping with the tenets of IWRM, it's a benevolent emperor, and the sword there is a rubber sword, and he uses it simply to admonish people who are being uncivil. So anyway, I'll continue with that. So just my purpose here, I suspect that a number of you aren't too familiar with IWRM, and so I kind of took that approach. That you're not real IWRM junkies, and perhaps you won't be at the end of this presentation. The URL you see right below the talk purpose is that of my WaterWired blog, and what I will do within a few hours after the conclusion of this is I will post my PowerPoint presentation on the blog. It'll be slightly modified from the one you're seeing here because I've added a number of additional links. And I will encourage you not to try to write stuff down because I have links interspersed throughout this presentation, and you'll be able to get those when you see the whole version there. So anyway, let me introduce. This is the Emperor's evil twin, the Water King. He will be suppressed during this presentation, and you will not have to worry about him. But these are three of his favorite sayings, and number 3 there is very dear to my heart, and it relates to number 1. So anyway, I also want to thank the IWRM Brain Trust. As you can see, if you peruse this list, most of the people are my colleagues at AWRA, but they represent a diverse group of water professionals from diverse organizations, universities, state, local, and federal government, and also private industry. And we've got engineers, we've got planners, we've got biologists, we've got facilitators, all kinds of people there. So I want to thank them. Way at the bottom in red is my wife, Mary Frances Campana, who is not an IWRM junkie, but she tolerates living with one, and she's been extremely supportive in all this. So anyway, what do we mean by integrated? I thought I'd start out real basic. And I just got these from dictionary.com, and in red I've highlighted the words in the definition that I think are most instructive: coordinating, harmonious, interrelated, cooperatively, different groups as equals, commonly held values, etc. So I think you can get the my drift where I'm going. And so what is integrated water resources management? And that's in capital letters, and it has the awkward English acronym of EWRM or IWRM or something like that. But it's essentially a process which really looks at the coordinated development and management of water, land, and related resources. You're trying to maximize economic and social welfare. You're trying to be equitable. And of course, you're interested in sustainability of ecosystems and the environment. That's a general definition from the Global Water Partnership. IWRM has been around in one form or another, or I should say in this form, since the early 90s. It was actually promulgated in 1992 in the Dublin Principles after the meeting in Dublin, the International Water and Climate Conference. And in the late 1990s, it started to become or take hold as IWRM in capital letters. Okay. This is an operational concept similar to the definition that appeared on the previous slide. But again, we're looking at getting diverse stakeholders. We want insights from everybody involved, and we want to be efficient. We want to be equitable. We want to be sustainable. Now, in the small print at the bottom there, you'll see that there are other things. There's a concept called One Water, which is developed by the U.S. Water Alliance. It pertains mainly to urban water. There's another one with the acronym of OWOW, One Water, One Watershed, and these are various forms of integrated water resources management, so we're not going to worry too much about those. Aha! This spiral here, the IWRM spiral, looks very confusing, but it actually illustrates a very good point, and that's that integrated water resources management is dynamic. It is not a static process. You don't come up with an integrated plan and then say, okay, we're all done, let's go home. No, what this illustrates is that you keep going around and around, you keep and you don't just go around, but you go up. You'll see the arrow on the left, the progress. But basically, once you get done, you make sure that things are on track. You're monitoring, you're evaluating, and if things change, your watershed changes, your population changes, the climate changes, then you alter and keep going around in the spiral there. So it is kind of a never-ending process because we're dealing with systems that are not static. And so that's one thing you have to remember. These are some IWRM principles or world principles. You can see it's comprehensive, it's participatory, and these kind of words keep coming up all throughout IWRM. Participation, comprehensive, equity, equitable, protection, sustainability, so on and so forth. I also have an alternate definition, and that's simply that I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. And you'll notice I'm giving my call out there to former Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart. Those of you who are old like I am probably remember that in the 70s, when a case involving pornography came before the Supreme Court, Justice Stewart was asked if he could define it. And he said, no, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. Well, it's kind of similar with IWRM, at least in my view. Now, just when we thought we knew what IWRM meant, it seems to be supplanted lately by another term, integrated sustainable water management or sustainable water resources management. And the reason for that is that we are now developing, or the UN is developing, sustainable development goals, which have replaced the Millennium Development Goals, which expire at the end of the current year. And so people have said, well, we need to put sustainable in it. So we now have down below ISWRM or ISWAM, and I think I'll copyright those terms at the end of this presentation. So anyway, let me give you some examples, and I've got some quotes below most of my header slides here. One is from former Colorado Congressman Wayne Aspinall. In the West, when you touch water, you touch everything, and that would hold true for things outside the Western United States. Now, This is interesting. These two maps here, the one on the left is John Wesley Powell's classic map showing the arid states or the arid regions of the continental United States and how he would have divvied them up into states based on watershed boundaries. So one could argue that's kind of an early approach to IWRM. The one on the right, for those of you living in the southeast part of the United States, it looks sort of familiar. That is the boundaries of the Tennessee Valley Authority, and this was a governmental agency created during the Depression in the U.S. In the 1930s, and it provided water, power, land development, and essentially was supposed to pick up the economic development in the region. Now, some of you may be cringing at the thought that the Tennessee Valley Authority illustrates integrated water resources management, but it does so in the sense that it's trying to look at all the resources and manage them in an effective way. Whether they've done that or not, then we can probably discuss that in another webinar. This is what I call Extreme Powell, and this is a map that was done several years ago by a fellow, I think it's John Lavey, fooling around one day, a cold winter day in Montana, and fooling around with GIS and stuff, and he put together this map of the United States if the state boundaries are based on watersheds. And there were a few constraints, and I've got the URL that you can look at down there. It's kind of fascinating to look at, and actually this was done about 10 years prior to when Lavey did his thing. And this is from a paper by Jerry Kaufman. I've got the URL down there. It'll take you to the paper itself. But he did this, I think, in 2001 or 2002, showing how the states would look if you used watershed boundaries. And he's also got an explanation of what this might mean in terms of would things be better, would things be worse. So that anyway. The next one is something that may make some of you cringe if you're in the southeast again. This is a map of the Florida water management districts. Now, Florida has 5 water management districts. This was set up in the early 70s. You probably couldn't do something like this again, but the water management districts are integrated in the sense that they're looking at all aspects of water. They're looking at ecosystems, they're looking at water quality, they're looking at water supply, etc. Now, the approach is, of course, top-down, which is one that's not favored in IWRM, but essentially in terms of being integrated, the water management districts are, I think, a pretty good example. Another good example that I don't have here are the natural resource districts that the state of Nebraska has. And they've done some really remarkable stuff there in terms of IWRM, and I'd encourage you to take a look at them. Okay. The example I'm going to use for integrated water management is something that we've done here in Oregon, Integrated Water Resources Strategy. Okay, and note that wonderful quote there, "The road to help is paved with good intentions." Now, this is a map of, of Oregon. We've got close to 4 million people, about 96,000 square miles, fairly large state. Now, the western 1/3 or 1/4 of the state, the Pacific Ocean, of course, is on the left, and the Columbia River forms most of the top boundary, but not all of it. But the western part of Oregon, where I live, in the town of Corvallis, is fairly wet. Where I live, we get about 1 meter of precipitation a year, average annual. The coast range, which runs right along the coast of Oregon, north to south, there's some elevations there that get almost 100 inches or about 2.5 meters of precipitation a year. So we get a lot of rain, but if you go to the east, most of the rest of the state, once you get east of the Cascade Range, the mountains, which are much higher than the coast ranges, you're essentially in the rain shadow of the Cascades, and it's very dry. And so eastern Oregon is really, it's high desert. So we have a lot of different water needs and water supplies. And the map, by the way, here shows the location of the SNOTEL stations, which measure the snowpack. So, of course, they're found in generally higher elevations. This is a title slide from a presentation I gave, my gosh, 7 years ago. we ran something called the Oregon Statewide Water Roundtables. And these were essentially listening sessions where we went around the state. We only had time to do 5 because we were doing it simply in the fall of 2008 to beat a legislative deadline. And we facilitated some sessions asking people what they thought was important with respect to water, what the state should or shouldn't be doing. And we went to rural areas. We went to the Portland metro area. So we had big cities, little cities, no cities. The messages were actually quite consistent in the sense that they wanted the existing system of water rights, which in this part of the United States we have prior appropriation for the most part. They didn't want that messed with, and they also wanted more money. This was unusual, given to the State Department of Water Resources to assess water resources, not so much to regulate them in any further degree, but to actually figure out how much water was there, and some other things too. They were concerned with quality, etc. Now, what happened was that in 2009, the state passed a bill that called for the development of a water resources strategy. Okay, not a plan, not a policy, but a strategy. And this was done for a number of reasons. For example, if you said water resources plan or policy, right away people start to think, well, your policy is to take my water away and give it to someone else. So this was very wise politically and other reasons. And so that bill was passed. About $250,000 was allocated to the Oregon Water Resources Department, and this young woman here, she's one of the IWRM brain trusters. This is Brenda Bateman, whose responsibility it was to come up with this strategy, and she did that by having a number of listening sessions throughout the state. She had a citizen advisory board. She did all the right things, she and her staff, when it came to that. And so this strategy was formulated. It was adopted just about 3 years ago. It serves as a blueprint. If you check out that URL, you can be taken to the page where you can actually see what this strategy is. And perhaps most importantly, it encouraged place-based planning. So what Brenda and the state wanted people to do was look at this plan, and then you can go to this URL here and find out how can you do place-based planning. And so this was intended to be a bottom-up approach, not a top-down approach. And so actually some places in Oregon are engaging in this. The Oregon Water Resources Department has an RFP out, which will actually help some people, not a lot of money, but to help them get started developing these plans. Now, another thing that the strategy program did was it researched other states. And if you're interested in what other states are doing, go to this link here and you can find out what California is doing, what Texas is doing, and what the state of Washington is doing. Now you'll notice that California calls it IRWM, and that stands for Integrated Regional Water Management. So with our California colleagues, like my friend Lisa Butler, she'll, it's not like she's dyslexic and getting the letters mixed up. That's what California calls it. Now California, which of course has taken a lot of heat lately for water planning, especially with respect to groundwater use, has been doing this integrated planning on, and this is done at a local level for actually over a decade. So they've been involved in this. People may be surprised to find out that Texas is doing this. We think of Texas as being the Wild West, but they're engaged in water planning, and also Washington has watershed planning. So I'd encourage you to take a look at this publication. And these are some of the details of the place-based planning, some of the things that need to be considered when you're doing it. One thing that's very interesting is the second bullet. Sometimes when people say, oh, we're going to do water management and the state is going to let us do it, it doesn't mean you can forget about existing state laws and requirements, because the state does have primacy when it comes to water allocation and water quality. Along with water quality, the federal government is also involved. And so you can't take a plan or a local plan and have it say, well, we're not going to apply prior appropriation in this region because we don't want it. No, sorry, that's not going to do. So you need to be consistent with state law and requirements. And this is true in many other states too that have this kind of approach. Now I want to go through some of the resources and activities that I'm familiar with in terms of integrated water resources management. I'm obviously heavily involved, invested in the American Water Resources Association, but other groups, people are surprised to learn that the Army Corps of Engineers is involved in integrated water resources management very heavily. The Global Water Partnership, on whose steering committee I sit, is a non-governmental organization, international, based in Stockholm. I'll talk about some of their activities. And also there's UNEP, United Nations Environment Program, and they have a partnership with the consulting firm DHI, and they have a water portal. And then that last one is IWRM, and that stands for the International Center for Integrated Water Resources Management, and they also have some activities as well. Now, I'm going to lean heavily, again, on the AWRA and some of our activities. We've had a couple of professional conferences, 2011 and 2014, where that's where the IMPRA, at least the 2011 conference, the IMPRA made his first entrance, and of course it was completely forgettable, I think, from all. Anyway. So here's the Snowbird Conference, and if you go to use these URLs, you can get the proceedings or at least the abstracts. Now, that second bullet, at Snowbird, we had a symposium on collaborative modeling and IWRM. And for those of you who aren't familiar, collaborative modeling, which is sometimes called shared vision planning or mediated modeling, but it's essentially using a model to bring people to consensus with respect to a particular issue. And if you're talking about water resources, it maybe has to do with allocation, maybe has to do with water quality, maybe has to do with all aspects. And so this has become a tool in getting people to develop integrated water resources management plans. And the folks at the Institute for Water Resources of the Army Corps of Engineers, which is, if you will, the Army's think tank when it comes to, or the Corps of Engineers think tank when it comes to water resources, people like Hal Cardwell, Stacy Langsdale, Guillermo Mendoza, I'm not sure if Guillermo's still there, but they've been instrumental in developing, and also Gene Stockheave, can't forget Gene, in developing these techniques and applying them specifically to instances of IWRM. So they had almost a 2-day symposium there, and actually, if you go to that link, you can actually find the proceedings or the summary that they published. So anyway, our little magazine, Water Resources Impact, we've had 2 issues devoted to IWRM, and then the last conference we had was in Reno in 2014, where we focused more on theory to application of IWRM. Okay, so anyway. Case studies, we've published 2 case studies. The first one was by our policy committee, and it covered 6 specific case studies. One, the aforementioned Oregon case. We had the St. Johns River Water Management District in a water supply study. We had the Minnesota River Watershed study, and we had several others. So this is a good one. You can download it at the link there. We also had a second report. This was specifically dealing with IWRM as opposed to flood and drought management. So these issues or these results were a little specific, and so these were applied strategies and lessons learned from around the United States. So this is actually available. We also have a third one that is in press or nearly in press that are going to deal with similar issues in floods. Now here's what I said about the Army Corps of Engineers. They published, and you can download it at that URL, a report that is maybe, oh gosh, no more than 25 pages. very readable, essentially taking you from a neophyte to understanding IWRM and what it entails. And so I'd encourage you to read that. It's pretty easy reading. It's not a several hundred page document that'll keep you up at night. Okay. The next one that comes up is a resource from the Army Corps of Engineers. Okay, it's called watertoolbox.us. That is the URL. And it's a data portal. Now, this is a work in progress. That URL is valid. It'll take you to the home page as shown on the left. And you can see down at the bottom there are a whole bunch of logos from the various federal agencies that are involved with this. And this is supposed to be one of these, as it says, one-stop shopping and link all the data websites for all the agencies together. So again, this is a work in progress, and I haven't looked at it in a while, but initially, put it this way, it's a very ambitious project because you're trying to get a bunch of agencies coordinated and have all the data in one place. Okay, so that's from the Corps of Engineers. A couple others I'll mention. The Global Water Partnership Toolbox. And again, not trying to be a shill for an organization with which I'm involved. The toolbox, I think, is one of the best resources you can find on the internet. The Global Water Partnership has been around since 1996. We will celebrate our 20th birthday last year, so the GWP has been doing IWM for a long time. So if you go to that URL, you'll find over 200 case studies, you'll find publications, you'll find handbooks, you'll find resources, management tools, all kinds of things. So that's a real good resource. I think it's the best in the world. The second one is the UNEP DHI partnership, and this has just been launched, I think, last month. It is a data portal, and I might add, as they will add, this is a beta version, so they are still fiddling with this. But what they want to do is essentially, and this is a worldwide resource. They're looking for data from all over the world, just like the GWP. But so it'll be interesting to see, how this pans out. But if you do go to that URL, you will be taken to the portal and a map and a few other places. So hopefully this partnership will produce something that is really quite remarkable. The last one is the IWRM URL. IWRM is it's what's called a UNESCO Category 2 Research Center, and its mission is to promote IWRM on a global scale with special reference to the Western Hemisphere, North and South America and Central America. It is run out of the Corps of Engineers Institute for Water Resources, and you can see it's got the Gov extension there on the end. So they don't have a whole suite of data there, but you can see the work of their partners, and Oregon State University and AWRA, two of my organizations, are partners, and so you can see what the partners are doing, and some people are doing some remarkable things with integrated water resources management. So that's a good one. Okay. Now we're getting close to the end. Groundwater and Juggernauts. Okay, I love that quote there from John Laird. Water is the Rubik's Cube of public policy. Groundwater, and in the revised PowerPoint that I'm going to put up on my website, I'm going to have a link here to take you to a groundwater and IWRM website. But IWRM, of course, deals with sustainability, and the watershed is often used as the management unit. Why not? You're dealing mostly with surface water. But we know that groundwater, once you get past glaciers and ice caps, about 95% of the world's fresh water is groundwater. So one thing that you're concerned with is your groundwater being pumped sustainably, or are you risking things like land subsidence and so on? What are the boundaries of the groundwatershed? Is non-renewability, is that a big issue? And it usually is, because that means that you're pumping groundwater in what's called an unsustainable or non-renewable category. And so these are some of the characteristics of non-renewable groundwater. Could be limited replenishment or recharge, or maybe no recharge, so-called fossil aquifers. It could be replenished, but over long time scales, much longer than human lifetimes, or even 7 human lifetimes. The water is mined. Abstraction means you're pumping out more than's coming in naturally. It could be polluted water, and it also could be somewhat decoupled from the hydrologic cycle, and this is what some people refer to as fossil groundwater, where it's really not linked to say stream flow or recharge or whatever. It's just kind of sitting down beneath the ground. So this can cause a problem when you're trying to integrate this with IWRM, because remember, IWRM talks about sustainability and those kinds of things, and obviously a lot of groundwater is not being pumped sustainably. Now this little block diagram, for those of you who aren't geologists, this is a chunk of northeastern Oregon called the Umatilla Basin. Running down the left side of the picture, you can see a stream, that is the Columbia River, which is quite a large stream. In the middle is the Umatilla River. And some of the lines penetrating down are actually some very deep wells that pump lots of water from a basalt aquifer. And this simply illustrates that as you can see, the groundwater system underlies several different watersheds. And so if you're pumping groundwater from, say, the left-hand part of the diagram, some of that water may be coming from underneath the 2 watersheds on the right there, the Umatilla in the middle and the one in the southeast part of the block diagram. So this can cause complications, because if you're trying to develop a plan for one watershed, well, maybe some of your subsurface water is being taken away by someone else. So this can be a problem when you're trying to develop an IWRM plan. The other one is interesting. A paper was written several years ago by Mark Giordano and Tushar Shah. Mark is now a professor at Georgetown University, and Tushar Shah works at the place where Mark used to work. They were colleagues, the International Water Management Institute, which is based in Sri Lanka, in Colombo. And Mark came out with this, Mark and Tushar, who are very well respected in the water management field. In fact, the International Water Management Institute several years ago won the Stockholm International Water Prize, the entire institute, for the pioneering work they do. They kind of were complaining, although it really didn't, they really weren't complaining, that IWRM has essentially become an end in itself. And when they say IWRM, they mean, as in the title here, in capital letters. In other words, not lowercase integrated water resources management, but uppercase. And so one of the things that they feel has been pushed is that some water management systems have been functioning very well, apparently, for a number of years, and some of the examples they cite are in Shah's home territory of South and Southeast Asia. And then an NGO will come in and say, look, we're going to give you money to do some planning, but first of all, you gotta do this IWRM stuff, and here's what you're supposed to do. And so what they worry about is the fact that very workable, usable water management systems, which everybody seems to be happy with, are essentially being, I don't want to say destroyed, but they're being altered to conform to this IWRM paradigm. And so they say, look, we need to, go easy, and we need to make sure that if a system is working and it appears that the locals are happy with the way things are working, then, as they say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Okay, and I think that's actually worthwhile attitude to take. Now, what is my take on the groundwater and Juggernauts issues? Okay, as someone who's trained as a hydrogeologist, my take on the groundwater issue is that if you, strictly speaking, use the watershed scale and the sustainability requirement, you may not be able to include non-renewable groundwater in IWRM. Okay. However, I think as the future lays some more climate change on us, and population growth, we're going to see more and more use of non-renewable groundwater, which we already are using more than we should these days. It's going to become more important as a water source, if only as a buffer or temporary supply. So my sense is that we need to figure out a way to take non-renewable groundwater and make it a component of IWRM and then devise ways to management. Now, one thing you could do is you could manage it in concert with what's called managed aquifer recharge or managed aquifer depletion, which is actually a concept that has been around for a number of years. People don't like to talk about it very much, but essentially you decide, look, the aquifer is going to be depleted in the next number of years, so let's try to do this in, if you will, a manageable fashion. Okay, so that may be something we need to do, but it's an area that needs more work. And my take on the Juggernauts is that, again, I believe in integrated water resources management, the capital letter version, but I really don't believe that it should be necessarily shoved down people's throat when what they're doing actually works fine and is not disliked by the locals or by the stakeholders. And they actually have a nice quote there from the late Elinor Ostrom, who won the Nobel Prize a couple years ago. And essentially what they said, there's no one best system for governing water resources, and there are a number of different options for resource management than you find in the policy literature. So anyway, that's kind of my take on it. Now, coming to the end now, pros, cons, and one of my favorite quotes from the Roman historian Cicero. We learn nothing from history except that we learn nothing from history. So let's look at what I think are some of the pros and cons. Now, one thing I want to mention that later today, and I'm on Pacific time, so it's only about 9:40 in the morning where I am. Later today, I'm going to put up my PowerPoint, and there'll be some corrections and some links that you don't see on the version that you're looking at right now. So anyway, and actually some of the questions I get may influence some of my slides. But first of all, the things I like about it, it's got a holistic perspective. I think it promotes more concern for the environment because maintaining and sustaining ecosystems are clearly listed in the definition of IWRM. It does provide a framework, okay, for how you go about developing a management plan for a resource. It doesn't provide a framework in the sense that there's a checklist of 15 items and you just go down and check, so on and so forth. I think it encourages long-range thinking simply because it's a process that continues into the future, and as conditions change, some might argue this is just another form of adaptive management, but as conditions change, you need to alter the plan and rethink maybe what you're doing. And this is where monitoring and evaluation come into play. And I think it promotes connections between stakeholders. And I think this is especially true when you use what I referred to earlier as collaborative modeling or shared vision planning to try to reach consensus, because you've got people in a room or all online or on a Skype call or something, and you're trying to get to some endpoint that everybody is, if not jumping up and down with joy about, at least they're not extremely opposed to it. And the pro is that it's an inherently an interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary process. Okay. Now, one of the things you'll see about IWRM is sometimes something can be a pro as well as a con. And you could look at that last bullet item there, inherently interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary, and say that's going to be a pain in the neck, because we can't just have engineers and hydrologists doing the work. We need to get aquatic ecologists, sociologists, planners, political scientists, economists, all kinds of people. Okay, so now some of the cons, and as I call them, some of the issues, is this process can get expensive and time-consuming very quickly. very, very quickly. It gets expensive because there are a lot of different things you need to consider. There are a lot of different experts and stakeholders you need to involve. And, your funding agency, whether it's an NGO or a government, they may say, look, we don't want you to spend all this time. Why do you need all these different people? Just give us a project manager and a couple other people and then go do it. So they may not be willing to come up with the money to do this expensive, what they see as an expensive and time-consuming process. Okay. Now, many different disciplines are often required. Now, again, some people see that as a plus. It can be a plus, it can be a minus, because sometimes you might be accused of, say, what we used to call feather bedding. You're kind of loading the project up with people like, well, gee, why do I need a cultural anthropologist on this project? Or why do I need this? Why do I need that? Okay. One of my colleagues pointed out to me, he says, sometimes it can be too all-inclusive. Now remember, this is supposed to be an inclusive process, stakeholders, etc., but where do you stop? And when people joke about, we're going to have to rent, Madison Square Garden or something to have a stakeholder meeting or something like that, I think you have to be careful. I can't really give much advice on this because this is kind of outside my sphere of excellence. But anyway, you do need to include people, but how many do you have to include, or how many different groups, whatever. Another good example of a con, and this is not necessarily against IWRM, but there really aren't very good training programs available. In fact, in terms of academic, at least in the United States or in North America, I believe one of my hosts, Columbia University, has a certificate or some sort of academic track in IWRM. McGill University up in Montreal has a master's degree and also some online or some certificates available. I'm sure there are a couple others. I'm probably just not aware of them, but they are kind of scarce. Okay, so how do you get trained to do this? Okay, and remember, you're trying to train people to do something that's not really laid out very clearly anywhere. Okay, so, and that leads to the next bullet. It's vague. What exactly is IWRM? And if you can't tell me exactly what it is and what it entails, I'm not going to bother with it. And so you may get this from a funding agency, you may get this from a regulatory agency or something else. I say, look, you can't tell me what it is, so I'm not going to mess with it. Do something else. Just get the job done. And the last one has to deal with metrics. How do you monitor, how well you're doing? Monitoring and evaluation. Well, what do you monitor and what do you evaluate? So one of the complaints that sometimes people say is, what are the metrics? Okay, how do I know that we're doing a good job? And what do I see in the future? The first bullet gets to the issue, I think, of particularly groundwater, is the scalability. How scalable are plans? Okay. It can be applied to basin-specific issues. We'll see more compartmentalization in IWRM plans, and what I mean by this is, we don't just look at small little units, but if you're doing, let's say, a large plan, let's say you're doing an integrated water resources management plan for the Columbia River Basin, or some really big area. Well, there may be points where you can take off and focus on a sub-basin and go into more detail, so you can compartmentalize in that sense. I think we're going to see IWRM being proposed more and more to come up with resilient plans, because remember, the IWRM spiral, much as you may detest diagrams like that, it shows that this thing doesn't end and you need to progress in time, and when things change, you need to have a plan to make sure that nothing goes haywire. Okay, I think you're going to find it being more applied to climate-sensitive regions, again, for the same reason, again, the old spiral, because as the climate changes, and if this is built into your plan, you'll be able to cope with it, hopefully in a better way. I think we're going to have to see more groundwater applications. Training, of course, we need to see, and of course, modeling. There have been a number of attempts to try to, integrate this into kind of a modeling or actually a game approach to developing management plans. There are a number of games. DHI has its Aqua Republica, and there are a few others where you can actually come up with plans using kind of sophisticated modeling. And actually that was, I think, the original basis for the partnership between UNEP and DHI is to come up with the plan. So that actually does it for me, and I want to thank you. This is not the end, though. It is the end for me, but I just want to go to the next slide. This is a separate little PowerPoint. It's about 8 or 9 slides, and my good colleague John Tracy, who's the head of the Idaho Water Resources Research Institute, sent me this yesterday and said, you might want to look at this. And I thought it was worth including, but I'm not prepared to discuss it. In fact, when I post it on my website, I'd like to have you guys make some comments. But John actually comes up with some actually interesting, and I'll give you a teaser. Yep, you got some. From a science perspective, it would appear that the definition is not logical. From an engineering perspective, it's not solvable. And from a social perspective, the definition of IWRM appears to encourage debate, which of course it does. Okay, anyway, but you can take a look at that and let me know what you think. It involves some systems engineering or systems approach, and but for now, I'm not going to get into that, and that's just my thank you. So if you have any questions, I will be glad to respond to them. You've got my 2 email addresses there, or 2 of them. If you have a question that you think of after we go off the air, please don't worry that you're going to be bothering me or something. Just shoot me an email. Either one of those emails gets you to the same place. And as I said, I will put this up on my blog probably later today, maybe in several hours. I make sure I know all the links are good. I checked those last night, but I added some new ones. So anyway, I want to thank you very much. And remember, IWRM is in fact a process. It's not a prescription. And for some reason, or for that reason, a lot of people don't like it because there's not a checklist you can pull out, and then when you hit the last box, you can say, okay, we're done. No, it's something that essentially it just won't quit. So thank you very much, and have a great rest of the day wherever you are. If you have any questions, be glad to take them.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you so much. That was a great presentation, and I don't see anyone typing any. Oh, James is typing right now, so we might have a couple questions. Otherwise,
okay.
Thank you for providing your other contact information. So
sure.
We can do in the future, but
okay.
Let's see what pops up here. I think we might get a couple questions.
Okay. And Lisa, okay, let's see. Okay, thank you. PowerPoints will be on your blog. Yeah, PowerPoints will be on the blog. Okay, thanks for your presentation. What role do you think computational modeling has for IWRM? Okay, that's from James Rising. That's a very interesting question. My modeling days have long since gone, but that's something that intrigues me. And obviously, when you're managing water resources, whether you're doing IWRM or whatever, modeling becomes a big tool. And I'm actually intrigued, again, the folks at those folks who deal with collaborative modeling and shared vision planning, etc., use models, although they're not as sophisticated as some people might like. So I think in the future, we're going to see models that, I don't know whether they want to be called an IWRM model, etc., but that's a question I can't answer, but I do think there is going to be a substantial role in the future. Okay. And next one is from Jeremy Diner. I have a master's in IWRM. Is that university? Is that want to say Queensland? I guess UQ. And after 5 years, I keep coming back to this issue of top-down and bottom-up. Many agree that bottom-up is best, but all the people talking about fostering IWRM seem to be fundamentally part of the top-down approach. How do you think we should reconcile this issue? You know, that's a great question, Jeremy. One of the ways, well, you'll notice in the example that I used when I was talking about Oregon, that initially was a top-down approach. The state of Oregon, allocated some money to the state office of Water Resources Department, and again, they had stakeholders and they had advisory committees, but it was a top-down approach because they had the money. But now what they're fostering is a bottom-up approach by giving or putting out an RFP for people to say, look, we want you to do this. Just make sure you correspond to Oregon water law, and that's fine, how you want to manage things. So this is, I think when you say how are we going to reconcile, I think it needs to be, first of all, the top-down people have to be made aware that any kind of management plan is, at least in the context of IWRM, is really not going to work unless the people buy in or the stakeholders buy in. And so that's where I think the bottom-up comes. Okay. Let me cite an example. I almost used this as an example until I got an email late last night. A former state I used to live in, I won't mention it by name, but it's in the southwestern United States, did some regional water planning a number of years ago. In fact, I was initially involved in the process. And they set up 16 or 19 planning regions, and they developed plans and blah, blah, blah. And it seemed to work okay. But recently, the state department, the water department, has become a little heavy-handed in saying, well, we want to rewrite all the plans, and we want to do this ourselves, meaning themselves, the state department. And the email I got was from a colleague who said, wait a minute, 20 years ago, didn't we opt for something else? And so I don't know how they're going to, she asked me for help to try to get this resolved, and I'm not sure what to do. So that's a question we need to think about, but I think the people on the top, and oftentimes the people on the top are the people with the bucks. So if you don't do what they say, they're not going to give you the money. And this presents a dilemma, because if you need a management plan, you're trying to manage your resources, and someone says, look, you got to do it my way or the highway, or you don't get any money. And I think if I had the answer to that, I could give some webinars and actually charge money for them and have people sign up. So that's something, Jeremy, that we need to think about. So anyway, last one. Let's see. Do you know of anywhere in the... Yes, University of Queensland. I thought so, yeah. Do you know of anywhere that the value of ecosystem services are being counted for in IWRM? I could probably find those, but I'm wondering, one of the best examples of IWRM I can think of in the United States is the Delaware River Basin Commission. And one of the reasons is one of my colleagues, Carol Collier, was executive director there for like 13 or 14 years until she finally retired. I believe they are considering ecosystem services in their management plan. I can't be sure about that, but I'm pretty sure that they are. But that's a good question, because I think the ecosystem services has perhaps been a little bit put aside, and I might say, we're working on plans here. I live in the Willamette Valley, the Willamette River that flows north into the Columbia River by Portland. Ecosystem services are really big here, and we have a National Science Foundation project. I'm not involved with it, called Willamette 2100, which is essentially trying to produce a vision for what we want the year 2100 to look like in terms of water and resources. And I know they're considering ecosystem services there. Now, whether or not you would consider that an IWRM plan, I'm not really sure. Okay. But I'll tell you what, if you want, I'm curious now, MW. So if you shoot me an email at one of those addresses and just remind me, because you've piqued my curiosity now. I should know that, but I don't. So anyway, MW is typing. Let's see. Yeah, University of Queensland. Yeah, right. Okay, thank you. Yes, would love info. Okay, so I'll info on how they're doing it. Yeah, so send me an email and like you can put that in the subject line. So anyway, I think I've covered everything. Seems okay. Yeah. Yeah, Jeremy, again, University of Queensland, he said it seems like a lot of this meaning, you know, the difference between top down and bottom up, comes to people at the top being able to relinquish power and money. That's you hit the nail on the head. And if someone doesn't want to relinquish power and or money, then, you know, the stakeholders are kind of stuck. As I said, if they, you know, if your funding agency says, look, you've got to do it this way or you don't get the money, usually what you do is you take the money and maybe on the sly if you can. And in fact, one of my colleagues in our brain trust warned me about this. He said you run into this a lot where someone who's got the money says, I don't like you're doing all this ecosystem stuff, or I don't like you're doing all these stakeholders, just do the project. Then it's a real issue. So we just have to choose nice people to give us money, I guess. So anyway. Okay, so anything else? Again, we've run a little bit past, but I really appreciate your involvement, and you know, keep the faith and keep hanging in there. I certainly don't know all the answers, and you all know that because I couldn't answer most of your questions. But this is the interesting thing about IWRM. There are a lot of different ways to do it, and that's kind of what that frustrates some people, but it also is beneficial to a number of other people. Depends on your point of view. If you like things in a list, you're probably not going to like IWRM too much. So anyway, again, shoot me emails, and I'll have this up on my website, and I'll also send a revised edition to Lisa and the folks at Columbia so they can put this up on the website. And I guess, and there will be they recorded this, so you'll be able to hear my words of wisdom as well. So anyway, thanks very much. You all have a great rest of the day. I enjoyed this immensely, Lisa and Manu, and thank you all for putting up with me. Okay.
Yep, you're very welcome. Thanks so much, and thank you everyone for joining.
Okay.
And with that, I'm going to officially end this webinar, and we'll see you next time.